All right, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Friday Parashat class, Parashat Vayishlah. Still starring our father Yaakov Abinu. And the question today is, what can Yaakov Abinu teach us about the Jewish nation's historical attitude and approach to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel? Everyone's familiar with the famous adage, Ma'aseh Avot Siman Lebanim, the acts of the fathers, the lives and the way the lives of the patriarchs of our nation played out is a symbol, is a sign for things to come, for their descendants, for us, for their nation. So, Yaakov Abinu, throughout the course of his life, underwent a number of transformations. One fascinating transformation, if you track it in an undercurrent from the beginning of our exposures to Yaakov until the end, you will see in a remarkable way the way his life sort of mirrors the experiences and attitude of Am Yisrael vis-a-vis Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, from early times until modern times. I want to specifically focus on 3 points. One is the terminology used in our Torah by Hashem when he promises our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, the land of Israel. In what manner does he frame not just the pledge to give them the land, but the description of the offspring of the future of the nation? I want to not really focus, but very softly enter or engage a little bit into the Gid HaNasher and Yaakov struggle with the angel discussion. And finally, I want to talk about Yaakov and a very peculiar act that he performed when he first entered Israel, or first returned to Eretz Yisrael in our Parashat. So let's talk about this. Our forefathers, Abraham, how many times was he promised by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have future multiple offspring who would eventually inherit the land? There are actually 3 different forms which this took. The first one, and we're all familiar with them, is your offspring will be like the dirt, the dust of the earth. Next, we see him telling Abraham Avinu, go outside, count the stars. Your children, descendants, will be similar to the stars. And then finally, we sort of see a combination. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu was promising Abraham post Akedat Yitzhak, and he tells him that I will increase your offspring like the stars of the heaven, like we've seen once already. And then a little twist, like the sand on the shores of the sea. That's a new one. What about Yitzhak Avinu? Once. And that one is Kokevei HaShamayim. He likens his offspring, when he promised him the land, to the stars of the heaven. What about Yaakov Avinu? Starring in the last 2 parashiot, this one, and partially throughout the rest of 7 Bereshit. The first time he gets a promise, last week's parasha, Hashem tells him when he leaves Eretz Yisrael, just like his grandpa, your offspring will be like the dust or the dirt of the land. And then, not directly Hashem, but Yaakov's revelation in the beginning of this week's parasha, when he so feared the encounter with Esav, he said, Hashem, you already promised me things. I'm not asking for anything more than you promised me. And what you told me, Hashem, I will bestow goodness upon you. And I will place or let's say frame your children like the sand in the shore of the sea that is innumerable because of its number. So Yaakov revealed to us that other, which was the third description to Abraham, was also given to him. She's got the dust and he's got the sand. It's really a fascinating analysis as to what these terminologies even stand for. It's a lot. You'll have a lot of children. You'll have multiple offspring. You'll have an explosion of population, or at least a consistency of population. Now, there is an accepted approach to the contrast between the stars and the dust, let's say, and / the sand as well. Both of them can be very much quantitatively measured. In other words, they both imply a large number, a mass of people, and a measurable amount. But as many commentators point out, stars also imply a qualitative measure, and that the children won't only be great in number, they'll be great in prestige, they'll be great in productivity, in accomplishments, in the perspective of the world to them, and their ability to impact the world. And we don't have to look much further than this. Modern times, in this past century or half century, where the Jewish people disproportionately have been impacting the world in every aspect of life, from the religious and observant to the non-observant Jews, across the spectrum. And now the land of Israel is disproportionately represented in terms of the country, vis-a-vis the countries of the world, and in terms of their impact. So that's really Kochevei HaShamayim. That's the stars of the heaven. That's not just a qualitative blessing, it's a quantitative one, and it implies really our status among mankind. That is the traditional way to look at it. The Kli Yakar commentary on Torah has what I think is just an incredibly profound view as to these three different categories. He says, well, Kochevei HaShamayim represents not something about us, but something about our history. The stars of the heaven are the high point in our history, where we were, in our pinnacle and our apex. We were a country with power and sovereignty. We had peace, and people looked to us to forge beritot, confidence, and peace treaties and agreements. That was our high point. We were like the stars of the heaven because we were high in terms of our status. Afan ha'aretz. What is that? That is the absolute antithesis of the stars of the heaven. And that historically, unfortunately, we were downtrodden. Much of our history, you can say, because the majority of years of our history has been spent in exile. And therefore, it really implies a lowliness, and it really implies us being, unfortunately, trodden upon and crushed by our enemies, like the afar, like people step on the dust of the earth. And then there's Hol Hayam, the sea, the sand of the seashores. What does that represent? Says the Kli Yakar that he likens this to a wave. Think about a wave for a moment. A wave coming in with all its power and all of its speed and all of its potential to do harm. And it peaks in its strength at the very end. And it's high and it's dominating and it's daunting, and it comes down ready to devour and ready to crush all in its path. It falls down, smacks on the sand of the shore, and disintegrates and dissipates and disappears. He says, you know what the sand is? The sand is our resiliency to the enemies. In other words, their will to devour us, consume us altogether, and our ability to persevere and not allow them to do it. And they come down, they smack down hard on us, and they try whatever they do to wipe us out. And somehow they end up dispersing all over us and self-destructing, you can say, as has been the case with empires throughout the course of Jewish history. The Amek Davan, in fact, adds on to that, and he says that the sand really acts as sort of like a buffer of protection between the inhabitants of the world and the sea, right? Thank God for those beaches, right? That sea is not going to come and overflow and devour and be a deluge for us. No, we have a nice buffer. That's our sand, right? So that's a safe zone. Safe zone doesn't mean that we are prospering. It means that we are surviving. It means there's a guarantee that the enemy will not consume us altogether. Look at Yaakov Abinu and track his mode of comparison, God's mode of comparison of his future offspring at different points of his life. When Yaakov Abinu was leaving Eretz Yisrael, right? What did God promise him? He left Eretz Yisrael. Parashat Vayishlah. That's when he first entered into exile. Afar Haaretz, the downtrodden nation, lost in exile. And then when Yaakov Abinu, and I want to just step back for a moment. I should start with Abraham, really. See, Abraham incorporated everything, while Yitzhak was only the stars, because Yitzhak never left Israel. He had a dream life with very little adversity, some adversity, but not a lot. And that was really the fairy tale life of Yitzhak Abinu. He was called Olad Tamimah. He was a pure offering to God. And so he just had the comparison of the stars. Yaakov Abinu starts out with going into exile, and that comparison, Ka'afar Ha'adas. But when Yaakov Abinu reflects, when he's about to encounter Esav, and he is basically on his way back, tracking back to Israel, and about to encounter the enemy, Yaakov says, God, you told me I'll be like Chol Hayam. You told me that I'll be like the survivors. You told me that you won't allow them to come down and completely annihilate me. I'm encountering Esav right now. I'm not really asking for an incredible life. I'm asking you to survive right now. And therefore, Yaakov Abinu compared himself, or reminded, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he was praying for protection against Esav, that, hey, I'm like the sands of the sea. I'm requesting the ability to fend off obliteration and to survive, So you see Yaakov's comparisons of his descendants has so much to do with the points of his life, as do our survival in history, where we were like the dust of the earth, downtrodden for centuries and centuries and centuries, and somehow at the same time surviving and fending off the enemies and being resilient like the sand, holding our own against those waves. Now, if we move a little further into Yaakov Abinu's life, I'm just going to mention the Gid HaNasheh, that incredible, enigmatic encounter with the angel, Ish, Vayabek Ish Mo Ad Alot Alot Shahar, the East, Sar Esav's representative, aligned angel, so to speak, and struggled with him. And then he attacked and he hit his hip socket, and the Gid HaNasheh, the sciatica nerve, the hip socket was put out of place, and he was limping. So that's why we have the mizvah. We can't eat the Gid HaNasheh. I'll talk about that more in my class later tonight. And the famous comment of the Sefer HaChanuch that this really represents that our limp, yes, our injury, yes, the attack from the enemy, yes, but the fact that they won't overcome us. They won't overcome us, and we will continue, except for there's more than just a survival attitude in this episode by Yaakov Abinu, because Yaakov Abinu felt this battle coming. How do we know this? He isolated himself. He got up in the middle of the night. He moved his family. He went back over the river. He was almost waiting for this encounter. As he got closer to Israel, he could almost smell the fact that I'm not anymore a sorry case. I'm not anymore a pariah, downtrodden nation. I am encroaching upon, I'm gravitating towards some type of self-identity and some type of sovereignty. I feel Eretz Yisrael. And if I feel Eretz Yisrael, I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to resist. It's not just, well, sands of the sea, I'll hunker down, he's going to hit me, but God help me be resilient. No, this time it was, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to fight, because I sense this great land and the fruition of this promise coming towards me right now. And Yaakov Avinu, therefore, his attitude began to strengthen and to adapt and to reform vis-a-vis Eretz Yisrael. It used to be so far from him. I was dust, I was sand. Now I'm ready to fight. And you really see this in modern times, that as we got closer at post-Holocaust, right, to survival, well, if you go back even over a century, the Zionist movement started 150 years ago. But as we evolved in history and got closer to being able to even dream of having some sense of identity, we began to understand that it's time to actually physically stick up for ourselves and fight. And that very much is reflective of Yaakov Avinu's feeling and attitude as he gets closer to Eretz Yisrael. And then, as we said, I didn't mention what, there's that activity, very unusually, just as he enters the land. And this was right before the episode of Dinah and Shechem. It says that Yaakov Avinu, after Esav left, traveled towards Sukkot. And he says, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Id Shechem. He was complete. He came to the city of Shechem, Eretz Canaan. And the next pasuk, it's chapter Lamed Gimel, 33, pasuk Yotet 19. Vayichen et Helkat Hasadeh. He purchased a portion of the land in which he settled. Now, why in the world would he do that? Now, you'll ask me, why not? Everybody purchases land when they live on it. You know who didn't? His grandfather and his father. We never see such a thing. They knew that they were strangers and they were sojourning. Yes, Abraham purchased the Kibbutz, the Ma'at Machpelah. That wasn't to live on. That was for the burial of him and his future descendants in a place where his children could visit. But he never purchased a place of dwelling. Which, well, he's really going off task over here, right? What made him think of this? And the Ramban says as follows. He says he wanted that the beginning of his return to Eretz Yisrael to be his own, to be something that he's owning, embracing, and controlling. And he wanted a hazakah. He wanted a stronghold in the land. Because at this point in time, this wasn't just living on the land. It was someone who struggled for a large portion of his life outside of the land. And he survived, and he was resilient. And he made it, and he got closer, and he started to fight his way back, and now he's finally there. I'm not letting go again. I'm buying something. I'm investing. This is going to be mine. Yaakov Avinu understood that when the time is ripe and you are about ready to be handed something from God, it has to be yours. You have to own it. You have to embrace it. And that was in his personal history. Yaakov Avinu was very much representative of the national history of Am Yisrael in modern times. That we see that when we got close, and we're talking about a generation of people, much of which wasn't even connected to Judaism and observant, but our national conscience had this feeling that when we got so close, that it was being, the opportunity was there before us, being presented by Kadosh Baruch Hu to us, that we can't settle anymore. It's not only about survival, it's not even only about fighting back, it's about embracing, owning, and keeping the land. And Ibn Ezra says, to end off with a beautiful point, that this really demonstrates to us Yaakov's act of purchase and investment, the incredible height and the virtue of owning an Eretz Yisrael, and someone who has a piece. It's almost as if someone has a piece of Olam Haba in Olam Hazeh. Yaakov Avinu's life very much is Siman Levanim, a foretelling of things to come for the children. As he started off throughout his life, downtrodden Afar Ha'aretz in the exile, and then, like the struggle with the angel Nagid Hanasheh, fighting, taking up arms for his survival, and then finally, when given the opportunity to return miraculously to Eretz Yisrael, knowing that this time he's got to make it his. And indeed, our Father models for us our attitude and approach throughout history to our wonderful land, Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.